like literally 99% of issues in writing just come down to somebody wanting two things that contradict each other. People always ask me, "Oh, what about writer's block? What do you do about writer's block?" Just take it to somebody else. It works every time. Just bring it to other people. And if you're like a two-person group and you're getting stale, bring in a third person. Just get some fresh eyes on it. I remember I talked to a Better Call Saul writer right when my YouTube channel took off. This guy emailed me, and he was one of the writers in that show. And it's like the biggest regret of my life. He was like,
Today I'm very excited because I have the pleasure and honor of talking to Lucas Struntz. Lucas is the man behind the awesome YouTube channel LocalScriptMan, and it's a fantastic channel on screenwriting, on storytelling, on fiction writing, and he's doing some amazing work with it. So thank you so much for being here, Lucas, and taking the time to do this.
"Yeah, thank you for having me."
Correct me if I'm wrong, you are a fiction story consultant, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what I call myself now because it's kind of the bridge from YouTube to real big boy work,
Yeah.
which is what I prefer. But it started with YouTube. Like that's how I sort of grew a platform, and I just used that platform to sort of acquire interested clients. So yeah, it's like a big ad for me at this point. And
Yeah.
I haven't put a lot out on YouTube. I want to keep it up because it's good to have a platform. It's good to have a foot in that world regardless. But it's definitely not the end goal, you know?
Yeah. What is the end goal? I mean, if there is any.
Oh, I think I just want to be the guy you call in to fix your screenplay, to fix your project, to whip your narrative into shape. I mean, I'm good at it. It's probably the only thing I am good at. And I have a lot of recurring clients and people who really jive with what I do. So I just like to do that on a bigger scale. I don't need to be a visionary. I don't need to make my own stuff, at least not for a while. You know,
Okay.
yeah, because out of everybody, so many people have their baby, their movie idea, their thing. Um, out of like every 100 people who has a project that they just love with all their heart, only one of those is actually going to get it made. So I can either try to be the 1% and make my art happen, or I can sell to the other 99, and that's what I do. And there's no shortage of people with projects out there who could use my skills. So kind of just where my niche is.
Yeah. So, like, how did you sort of learn these skills to be able to assess a script and to understand storytelling in such a deep way that you already have?
Oh, I mean, I don't think my understanding is like absolute. I think I'm very simplistic in my thinking, and I refer back to very basic heuristics. Um, Really, most of the battle is just reading the script and then translating it into an outline and then throwing the script out so I can just work with the nuts and bolts of it. But as for how that system sort of came to be, I just graduated from my university back in December, so I'm recently out in the real world. But back then, we had these weekly writers' rooms where people would just come in and bring their student films and bring their short film scripts, and I just found myself always making the same points and always having the same gripes with stories. And at a certain point, I was like, oh, well, I'm pretty good at talking. I could probably start making YouTube videos because that's always been a bit of a pipe dream of mine. So I did, and eventually that took off, and it sort of launched my plans into action. I mean, before that, I thought I was going to be a documentary filmmaker of sorts. That was sort of the plan, and just didn't pan out that way. So, yeah, we'll see. But I'm still at the beginning of all this, so I'm not quite sure where it's going to go in the future.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the videos I've seen, like especially a few of them, there's you discuss certain topics, and it tends to stem from things that bother you about, you know the general consensus about storytelling or writing, or concepts that are either romanticized, or they're overrated, or they're not uh, as effective as they're they're portrayed to be. So when do you know, like, okay, this is a kind of a concept I want to turn into a YouTube video? Like, is it come from something that you've observed recently, or something that, like, maybe you feel should be criticized, or something that, anything about storytelling that bothers you?
Yeah, it usually stems from some mantra that people will just say over and over again and not criticize. I mean, there are so many voices on this platform, and most of them are all saying the same thing. Most of them are all going, "Oh, don't you know Quentin Tarantino? Oh, dialogue. Oh, Star Wars." I'm just like, stop it, and just things taken for granted. Like, I don't even mind when people like something that a lot of people like. It's just when it's said as if it's like descended from the heavens and we can't question it. There's just a little voice in me that needs to be a contrarian. And a lot of the time it just starts from that. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just annoyed with the way everybody talks about this stuff in the same way. And then I have to backtrack and actually figure out like rationally how to upend it. But yeah, I want to keep the conversation fresh. I think things have gotten kind of stale in this world, and if I have to go to the other extreme to sort of remind people they have the ability to think for themselves, then I'm kind of happy to be a crotchety old man in all this, you know? Yeah.
yeah,
What, like, what writing concept or rule you thought was maybe great or important until you realized was not really that big of a deal?
Oh, I'd say the concept of a protagonist, like I just don't care. The basically so much of like writing books. I probably got some lying around. Like I don't know, John Truby book. It's a lot
yeah,
that is focused on these sort of meta constraints of hero, helper, villain, mentor. I'm just like, well, you don't need to do that. You can just write these characters as little islands of emotion and have them float around and bounce off of each other. And I don't see the need for certain constraints. None of those systems can't be useful. I just don't like them being treated as God, as the end all be all of everything. And it's not that I'm advocating for a specific way of thinking. I'm always, yeah, I think I used to be sort of like, oh, I need to find the theory of everything. I need to find the correct way to look at it all. But at this point, I'm just trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work for me. And if other people happen to agree with that, that's cool. But there's no right way to do it. Um, yeah.
I guess when you're uh, talking to many writers regarding their story problems or their scripts, I presume you're discovering also maybe new problems and new things
Oh
about
yeah.
writing.
like,
That's where a lot of my content comes from. Just you start to realize people say all the same things. I mean, the analogy I always use is like I worked at a Home Depot for a year and a half, which is a home improvement store, and
Yeah.
I was a cashier and people would come in and they would swipe their card and they would always miss the hole, like the slot for the credit card. And they, oh, how do I get it in? Right. Um, and if you're just that person, you came in, you bought some wood and then you had 5 seconds of struggle before you checked it out and then you left and you didn't think about that anymore. But if you're the cashier and you see everybody do that over and over and over and over again, you realize that everybody's falling into the same exact trap and clearly there must be some communication issue. So then I get to climb up on a stump and say, hear ye, I know exactly what your problem is. You can't get the credit card in the hole." And they're all like, "Oh my God, I can't get the credit card in the hole. How did he know?" And then I just tell them how to put the credit card in the hole. And they're like, "Oh my, it's like you read my mind. It's like, yeah, well, it's repeat exposure, Everybody I talk to, it just it's more data feeds into the machine, and you start to see trends and stuff. I've worked with hundreds of people at this point. I've worked from like just total amateurs to industry people with like option projects, and it's the same pitfalls every time. It's the same thinking traps, and a lot of the time you just need another voice to come and break you out of that. So, what I try to be.
So, suppose you're writing something yourself. Would you rely on yourself completely to fix the problems, or would you like?
No, no, I have to.
Play it back.
I have people like them too. Yeah, you. I'm not exempt from the traps. Is the thing like the brain, like once you work on something for long enough, it just becomes solidified in your mind. Um, People always ask me, "Oh, what about writer's block? What do you do about writer's block?" Just take it to somebody else. It works every time. People have this myth of the lone wolf author slaving away in their room for 5 years on their draft, and I've met so many of those people who have like literally 5 or 6 years they've been working on this project, and I will make more progress with them in an hour than they have like in the last half decade. And it's not just because it's me. I think it's just because they're talking to someone. Be like, oh, I've never even shared this before. It's like, oh, so that's why you're not making any progress on it. You're not interacting with the world around you. You're a closed system. You've expended all of your potential in this moment. You need to add some fuel to the fire to have another brain in the room. Uh, People are either too proud or too anxious or too whatever to talk to other humans about it. But that's going to solve all your problems. Like it works every time. Just bring it to other people. And if you're like a two-person group and you're getting stale, bring in a third person. Just get some fresh eyes on it. That's the only thing that works really for me.
Yeah, it's true. I remember when I was in film school, we had screenwriting class, and when we had to write a script for us to shoot a short film, uh, once we do a draft, we would have to read the whole thing out loud in front of everyone. And whether it's the first draft or the seventh draft, like you have to read it out, and everyone's gonna, it's like a mini table read is done in class. And once everyone reads it out, and once you're done, and once the teacher's like, okay, what did everyone think, a lot of new ideas come up. And you get a good perspective because you're hearing it from 7-8 people in your class. And not all of it may be valid, but it's still, it gives you, you take whatever is useful to you. Like you said, like you also bounce off the ideas from someone else, because I think you end up losing objectivity, right, from with your own work.
Or you lose a sense of how it could be better because you become attached to certain concepts, and you get tunnel vision in certain areas where something just has to be a certain way. And sometimes all it takes is somebody else to come up and be like, it doesn't have to be that way. You could just do a completely different thing. You could just cut that character. And you're like, oh wow, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
Because you spent so much time ruminating on it that it's become familiar to you. And when that happens, you lose your flow state and things sort of stiffen up, it becomes harder to mold it.
Is there a recent movie or a TV show that impressed you with its writing?
I don't like superhero movies at all, but
Okay.
Deadpool and Wolverine was actually like super intelligent. I want to do a video about it.
Okay.
I got to the theater and I went to like an IHOP and I wrote like 5 straight hours. It was like middle of the night, and I just think it's very smart in the way that it juggles pop culture and its own story and the whole meta situation of that, dumpster fire of a corporation and all of their mistakes in the last 5 years. It just knows exactly where it sits in the zeitgeist, and it plays off that really well. And yeah, yeah, got a lot to say about that, but we'll see.
All right, great. I mean, I look forward to that video. But in like when you mentioned meta, do you think, like you said, if it's done right, and this is maybe not Deadpool, even for any other film in the same zone, is there a point where it gets too meta and you're like, it's too self-aware, it's is like it gets annoying maybe, or it
Gets
gets
Well, that's the thing. If you
lazy.
tell them the reason Deadpool works is because it's a meta story with a meta character. If you try to tell a meta story with a just normal character, then your narrative is now fighting, like your canon is now fighting the actual goals of your story. Like if you do like all these other multiverse shits that these Marvel, superhero franchise movies have been trying to do, right? It doesn't work because um some other actor in some character will show up and be like, but like the characters don't know what that means. It's just for the audience, right? But when you have uh, the fourth wall breaking character
Mm.
actually understands the significance of that, and so Deadpool is on the same wavelength as the audience and is able to play that higher level sort of meta game, and regardless of the story itself, it's just sort of this expertly placed commentary. I'm sure it was created by a committee of very smart people. Like this is a think tank, this is a piece of marketing, but yeah, still super impressive, you know. And you got to go all in if you're going to be self-aware. It's like you don't want to try to walk the line. If that's what you're going to be, if you're going to be a meta story, just be a meta story. And yeah, that's what it does, and it's pretty good.
they essentially just stuck with it and went all out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you got to commit to the bit.
Yep.
That's all it is.
Any TV show or any kind of maybe any episode or anything like that which you felt was really well done?
The last TV show I watched was Tokyo Vice on HBO, well, not HBO Max. I just thought it was really good. It's nobody knows about it. You can't even find clips about it online. But yeah, I just think it's super well written and it's fun to watch. And Michael Mann directed the pilot, and
Oh
yeah,
wow.
very clean show.
It's a crime drama. I think I've heard of this vaguely. I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah,
Bust.
it's about the Yakuza in Japan.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
really good.
What's a piece of writing advice that you keep going back to? Let's say you're stuck on a story, or uh, you have a sort of a creative rut.
Really, it's just the idea of leaning in. So when you is another thing that Deadpool does really well. When you find yourself in a situation where it's like, oh wow, this is kind of precarious. Like, what if like I don't want to take the narrative in that direction because that would be too offensive, or that would be too this, or that would be too that. Instead of trying to straddle the line and play both sides, just do the thing. Just go all out, lean into the thing that's bothering you, address it, confront it. Um, and that I find myself returning to that way of thinking a lot of the time in scripts where I'm like, it's like, oh, well, we can't have her die at the end of Act Two, because da 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 da. And I'm like, well, what if we do? What if we just like, if that seems to be the direction things are pointing to, let's just do it. Let's just um, own that, as opposed to trying to write our way out of something that, like, if all of the momentum and energy of a story is pointing towards one thing, and then you don't do the thing, like you're not capitalizing on like what your story should have been. So it's just
True.
it's a good philosophy to have. Just commit to the bit, lean in, uh, pick a side, go all in on a thing.
And you think when you do that, let's say, suppose it doesn't work, you know at least where to, like what direction to go. Like suppose you want to take a certain plot point or a certain direction.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, like literally 99% of issues in writing just come down to somebody wanting two things that contradict each other. So it's really a lot of what I do is I sit down with them and I boil it down to a binary choice. I'm like, so the reason your thing isn't working is because you're telling me the protagonist wants this, but she also wants this, and you have not reconciled those two things. So which is it going to be? And they go, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Just because it's never been spelled out like that. Because people think of stories as these like kaleidoscopic, things that they sort of forget that there is it all boils down to one through line. Like complexity isn't building a sandcastle grain by grain. Complexity is just putting the bucket down, and then you go in and you make your little carvings on it. Um, so it really comes down to finding the big shapes underneath. I think I'm really good at that just because I have good abstract pattern matching. So I can find that underlying thing and um, throw out all the details and just look at the basics. And then we work from there and we figure out where it's going. And then, if more details could be sprinkled back in, then you go in and you say, all right, so maybe that scene wasn't all that bad. Maybe we could find a way to reincorporate it. But, draft is like a body that you grow from DNA. So if your DNA is bad, then there's no point in growing your body yet. You got to get the recipe down. You got to figure out what you're doing. At least that's the way I think about it. Some people they try to build the sandcastle grain by grain, and most of the ones I meet are miserable. But if that's how your brain works, then go for it. Stephen King that, whatever. Yeah.
Do you find characterization more interesting or plotting?
I don't know. I think it really comes down to it's not characterization. It's I think building a psyche, you know. It's building a brain and figuring out what's driving that character and the plot just comes from that. If you can build a plot and if you can build a plot and not know the characters, then either your story is either your story doesn't need the characters to happen, or it's so emotionally unspecific that anyone could do it. And both of those I think are suboptimal. Like for me, plot is just it's a means of getting to the character beats I want, which doesn't mean it won't look natural in the finished product, but I'll just say, all right, I know I need her to learn this lesson. So how do I build an organic looking plot to get me there? Plot is not the product for me. The product is the catharsis or lack thereof that comes from the characters changing or not.
Is there a specific example of like a character which you felt was well well fleshed out and it had a good catharsis?
Hmm. Just think of something I actually like. Well, let me just I'll use a recent example that people have seen. Do you know House of the Dragon?
I've heard of the show, yes. I've not seen it, but
Yeah.
I've heard of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So this is just something people know about. So I'll use this to sort of sum up all my points.
Yeah.
The character of Damon, Matt Smith in House of the Dragon, he in the first season they understand him, and in the second season they don't really get what he's about, and it shows. Um, Basically, the the character is someone who is always running, always on the move, always going from one goal to another and sort of switching sides, doing things just for the fun of it, as is someone who's like running from a darkness inside of himself. And that's sort of the way that the show portrays that. So it understands who he is deep down, and it lets that inform his decisions. But then in the second season, they try to convince us that he craves power and he wants the throne. I'm like, does he really? Like that was kind of just like he was just trolling. And it's insisting on something. And if you understand the absolute root of a character at the very bottom, then you can see a decision they make and you can say, all right, that either works or doesn't. Um, so you don't just accept things at face value. You sort of just, if it doesn't plug into your existing conception of a character, it sort of sets off an alarm bell and you're like, wait, no, I'm not sure he would do that. And that's sort of the benefit of viewing characters in terms of psychology and emotional placeholders. Because if you get so hung up on, it's like, oh yeah, this is the scene where he goes to the store and sees so and does this and does that, and oh, gets into a fight, and then it can be easy to start viewing that as the character as opposed to the underlying psychology. So really, a lot of what I do is just stripping the paint off stripping the detail off and finding what's actually going on with the character, and then using that to build out the choices that they make. And if you lose sight of that, you can still have the character's energy, you can still have the character be fun, you can still have the character around, but you're not going to be able to achieve the payoffs you want, because you have to know, you can't, it's not enough to just say, oh, this is the scene where my character gets vulnerable, you know? If you have a character who's completely unfazed your entire story, and then you have a scene where you're like, okay, this is where I want them to get vulnerable. This is where I want them to get deep. You can't just say that. You have to understand what kind of deep that is, you know? And so if you wait until then to figure out what kind of deep it is, like, you're not going to know the character. You have to determine what the deepest level of their brain is before you even start writing their scenes, because how else will you inform the choices they make and the way they move through the world? That's just sort of how I approach it.
That yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think like I don't know if you've seen Better Call Saul.
Yeah.
Uh, for me, like when you were talking about it, it reminded me of Nacho, how we got to his vulnerability later on, but it was earned. Like nothing is done for free on that show. Like every moment is earned, and everything is uh, every character is carefully designed and put in
Yeah,
very
that show
Yeah.
is it's miraculous that they did as well as they did
Yeah.
in terms of prequel that was never planned. Like I
Yeah.
and like they don't plan those shows out. Like Breaking Bad wasn't, planned out.
Yeah.
I don't think Saul was either, which just it speaks to a different type of genius that's
Yeah.
more intuitive, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, obviously, but yeah, super impressive. I remember I talked to a Better Call Saul writer right when my YouTube channel took off. This guy emailed me, and he was one of the writers in that show, and it's like the biggest regret of my life. He was like, do you have any projects you're working on that I could show to my friends? And I was like, no, I make YouTube videos. Ugh. Right. Because he was like, oh, if you got any like film scripts, any pilot scripts like that you want me to shop around. He was actually offering me that. I was, I don't know,
Wow.
21. This dude offered me that. And like, holy, like that was like my first interaction with like a real writer. And
wow.
fast forward to like now, I have a lot of industry contacts and I'm doing okay. But just think what could have been if I had ended up working with that guy back then. And I was like, well, I'll let you know if I do. But it's too late. Which is why it's good to have something on you.
Yeah.
Like it's good to have a finished script on you. People will, you can only get so far without actually having a draft. At a certain point, people are going to be like, okay, so where's the script? And you're like, oh, I just had good ideas. Like, nah, you got to do it,
Yeah.
which is, it's a chore. Screenwriting, it's a real blue collar job. It's a real, like, it's kind of just brutal hours you got to put in sharpening that thing up. And um, yeah, it's the part I enjoy the least. I mean, I enjoy like figuring out what the scene is going to be, but it's much harder to actually write it, you know, and takes a lot more time. When you do it, you're proud of it, but it's just a different type of work for me. Um, it's not quite as flow state as the way I am in the planning stage.
Yeah. It's like that quote Vince Gilligan said, I like having written, not
Yeah.
not writing. Thank you so much, Lucas. Thank you for doing this. I had a wonderful time speaking to you and discussing writing and storytelling. Thank you so
Yeah, I
much.
appreciate you. Yep.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Yep, you too. Good luck with everything.
Let me know in the comments about what you think about this video. If you like this video, please do hit the like button. And if you want to see more such content, please do hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.